Welcome everyone to the AuditNet webinar series. My name is Jim Kaplan, founder and owner of AuditNet, and I'll be moderating today's webinar. Today we're pleased to have with us Joe Orengel and Brad Thiessen to cover how to break through barriers and drive more value from your data analytics program. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the founder of AuditNet with a background as a Chief Audit Executive, Internet for Auditors pioneer, and an auditor who believes and promotes the use of audit technology. Before we proceed to our presentation, I'd like to remind everyone of the housekeeping information. The housekeeping information and handout was sent this morning to all those who registered yesterday. The information is also available as a handout download from your control panel. In the interest of time, I will not read the information, but you are expected to review and understand them for this and all AuditNet webinars. Some important items to note. We are recording today's webinar. You can ask questions during the webinar using the chat box on your control panel. At this point, we are happy to have Arbutus Analytics join the AuditNet family. This webinar is the first in a series that Arbutus will be contributing to our community over the coming months. We're very excited to welcome two speakers for you today with a wealth of experience in how to make the most of your audit analytic efforts. I see that there's quite a bit of interest on this particular topic, so with that, let me turn it over to Brad Thiessen, Director of Client Service with Arbutus Analytics, to begin today's webinar. Brad?
All right, thank you, Jim, and hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar on how to break through barriers and drive more value from your data analytics program. Again, as you can read on my slide, I have been involved in analytics for many years, and certainly most of that has been in support of auditors and fraud examiners. The number of technology options out there that can add real value to audit teams continues to both increase and improve both in office quality and quantity. And with all of that, certainly I see a wide range in the utilization of technology, and specifically within audit. And this is why, again, we're really excited to bring you today's webinar topic, and certainly hope that all of you get one or more ideas that you can take away and use, whether for yourself individually or within your team. Just a little background for those who are not familiar with Arbutus Analytics, or again, maybe even how to even pronounce Arbutus. Again, I was thinking for fun, it would have been interesting to see if we were able to get to our first poll question today without saying our name, and then have you all vote on the way you think it is pronounced. Again, in my experience, I think we would have seen quite a diverse results there. Again, in case you are curious about where our name comes from, it is actually a tree, the Arbutus tree, that is native to the beautiful Pacific Northwest, where we are based. Now, about Arbutus, the company, Arbutus provides data analytics and automation technology to meet the requirements of today's auditors, business analysts, and fraud investigators. Our user community is spread over 50 countries. I think we're currently in like 53 countries. Arbutus products and solutions easily integrate with the complementary technologies that you could be using today. And that could involve things like query languages like R, Python, SQL. It involves spreadsheets, I'll say Excel, and data visualization tools like we will see later on in our session today, whether it's Tableau, Qlik, Power BI, and even around things like audit management technologies and providers. We are very happy today to have Joe Orengel with us as well. Joe's knowledge and experience with audit and analytics is extensive, as I'm sure you'll learn today. And as the name of his firm suggests, they bring a unique combination of skills to their clients, including real thought leadership in visual representation of data and results. So before I hand it over to Joe, we've allocated time to answer your questions, of course, at the back portion of our session today, but we may also have time to answer questions during our polling questions. So everyone is welcome to start submitting your questions now, and I believe Jim will be moderating those questions as they come in. Okay, so I'm going to hand it over to Joe to get us started.
Brad, thank you. The appreciate the opportunity to be here with the group today, and going to start by sharing some research from Gartner, specifically on the use of data analytics software. The analogy I like to draw here is that joining a gym or a fitness center is not enough to get into great shape. Not only do you need to invest in analytics technology, but you also need to use the technology on a regular basis. And Gartner surveys their clients and audit executives across a variety of companies and industry and sizes. At the start of 2018, they pointed out to us that while almost everyone has made some investment in analytics, only about 26% of their clients and survey takers were using those analytics on a regular basis. And that stands out to us. Again, it's not enough to own the software to really get value from it. You've got to be using it. With that, we wanted, I guess, Jim to bring a polling question and see if folks on this call today have a same or similar experience. So how often are folks on the call using data analytics? Is it 4 out of 5 audits, down at the 80 or 100%, or 3 out of 4, about half, etc.?
Okay, we've launched the poll and the votes are coming in, so if you have questions, please feel free to post them using the chat box and share the results. And I don't know if you can see this, Joe, but
yeah. Okay,
you can. All right. And
so
comments?
I would say that the comments are it looks like things are changing some. If we might define regularly as more than half of the time, then for the folks on the call today, we're closer to perhaps 40% of folks using analytics on a regular basis, but still less than a quarter of the group who are using them 3 out of 5 times or more frequent. So I think the Gartner poll of 2018 is probably still okay with our sample size here, and going to bring us to some 2019 data from Gartner, and we'll see what they tell us this go round.
Very good. Okay, I will go ahead and hide the poll and turn it back to the slides.
Thank you. Terrific. So the question that Gartner asked this year was not specific to data analytics, but rather they asked a two-part question. What are some important problems or challenges that internal audit has? And there were a couple of dozen types of challenges that folks were asked about. On the x-axis, we're asking what percentage of organizations are not confident that they're solving this problem well, and then also on the y-axis, how important are each of these problems. And the top 4 problems that Gartner chose to highlight includes our good friend data analytics being in the top right quadrant. And I think that skills mismatch with audit needs is one that we'll talk to a little bit here and really identify the kinds of skills that are needed in the internal audit world so that we can do a better job of addressing the particular challenges of data analytics. So again, I think I'm encouraged by what I'm seeing from our first polling question. And I think it's an opportunity for us to share what we've seen are some of the keys to success for audit organizations that are really in that top quartile or so of using analytics on a majority of the audit projects that they're working on. So the 5 highlights that we see, what are the repeatable chances for success in the audit world? Brad, if you'd advance. 5 areas of focus that we see. Number 1 in the picture that we've got here is our firm's quick start methodology. That is to have a repeatable way to use analytics on the planning of every internal audit project and often on the execution of those projects. We feature what we call our quick start methodology, which I've got off here to the right, beginning with brainstorming. That is to involve all auditors on the team, not just the data folks, but all folks on the team to identify what business questions they might want to ask for a particular upcoming audit, wanting to connect those business questions to the underlying digital data, in a very iterative process between acquiring the data, developing some of the initial queries, doing some of the analysis, and then getting to the reporting stage. A repeatable methodology is very important, and we'll build on that here in a moment. The second item that we wanted to talk about is really on the skills profile, and this goes to that second point that Gartner makes, that doing an alignment of the skills on the audit team together with audit department goals and objectives. There's a number of skills that are often needed for success in data analytics, and we've got a point of view on that. How do I get started? Brad and I will show you some ways to develop some quick wins. The best way to get funding for a big project is to ask for funding for a small project and do that small project successfully. So demonstrating quick wins is certainly important. In our experience, the traditional scripting languages are Arbutus and generally it's Canadian competitors. Those are very excellent tools for audit analytics, as you'll see in a moment. But together those tools become even more powerful with a visual reporting lens, and we'll be showing how Arbutus works together with one of those visual tools being Tableau. And I think our last point, the notion of investing not in a single tool, but rather multiple tools is a particular category of success, a characteristic rather that many audit departments that we see that are really leading edge are using multiple tools. Sometimes it's spreadsheets, sometimes it's more traditional audit software tools like Arbutus Analytics. There's often R or SAS or Python together as well. So let's talk a little bit about that methodology. This is our firm's methodology. Whether we're talking about Visual Risk IQ or some of the big 4 firms, even data science textbooks will have a multi-step methodology for success as it relates to data analytics, and we want to encourage everyone to have a specific and repeatable methodology that walks through a series of steps. Ours that we highlight here has 5 steps, and I think you can see how with the arrows it's a very iterative process between planning a particular test and getting the data and writing the queries and doing the interpretation, and then moving toward continual auditing to also remediate any control issues and then use analytics in your follow-up testing as part of an ongoing monitoring program. So certainly some sort of methodology is good, and here is one that we do recommend. One of the experiences that we have and really an opportunity to use visual analytics more comes into what I want to call out as the difference between confirmatory analytics and exploratory analytics. If, Brad, next slide. If if we think about a confirmatory question, right, the confirmatory question says, did the purchase order get issued after the vendor invoice, right? And we can imagine whatever our tool of choice is, Excel, Arbutus, other tools, we could ask, let's compare the date between the invoice and the purchase order, and whichever one is older or younger, we'll either confirm that this PO was or was not issued after a particular invoice. It's what I'd characterize as a confirmatory query as opposed to an exploratory one. What an exploratory query would do is it's more of an open-ended question. That is, let me relate the date of the invoice to the date of the PO. Let's compute the number of days between those two columns. Sometimes it's positive, sometimes it's negative. Maybe there's an average. Let's find the average of each of those dates, and let's find transactions that might be some multiple of that average. That's more of an exploratory query. And the techniques that are often used in exploratory queries tend to benefit from visualization, which we'll see a little bit more here. So we'll introduce the notion of confirmatory versus exploratory queries and come back to that in some of the examples that we'll share with everyone. Now, the next thing I wanted to talk about are the skills themselves. And this is not our idea. We've got another logo up here on the screen from APRA, which is the Association of Professional Research Analysts. I think in a friendly way we can call them data nerds or data scientists, perhaps, that are focused on fundraising and on philanthropy. And Visual Risk IQ has done a number of data analytics projects in the fundraising world. Many of the business questions that folks want to answer are Frank and Francis the same donor? Are Brad and Bradley the same donor? Those are similar questions to an auditor that an auditor might want to ask. Is Bradley's consulting firm perhaps related to our employee named Brad? So we've done more than our fair share of work in the fundraising world. What we learned from our fundraising data friends is that there's a specific curriculum for fundraising data science, and it focuses on these 7 particular bullets, beginning with project management on the top and change management on the bottom. In the fundraising world, the 6th bullet, instead of saying finance and audit domain expertise, they call out the importance of your data scientist in the fundraising world to have fundraising expertise. And when my partner Kim Jones and I saw this list, it really resonated with us. These are the skills that auditors need to have. Being a good data scientist does not make you a good internal audit data person. Being a good data scientist means you're good at data acquisition or perhaps statistics or visual reporting, but being a good data scientist doesn't necessarily make you a good internal auditor or vice versa. So what we ask our clients and folks in our network, which of these skills do they believe on their team are most strong, and then also perhaps which ones need to be developed.
And Brad, we did have a question come in. If you want to take this, how do you use data analytics in the planning phase? This came from Francois.
Yeah, well, hey, thank you, Francois. That's an excellent segue for what is to come. Certainly, as Joe's already talked about, that exploratory element of querying data. This is very much we see as a key part in understanding your data and preparing for the data and maybe the directions you want to go with that data. And certainly I'll be speaking a bit more and talking a bit more about that. But that's certainly how would I answer that. Anything you want to add to that, Joe?
I'd say that it's really understanding the transactions, right? So various techniques, right? Sort them from the largest to the smallest, calculate the average, see who's much larger than average or much smaller than average, building various pivot tables, maybe some visual exploratory analysis, understanding what is it about this particular audit unit that's being reviewed compared to its peers. Exploratory analytics is absolutely how to use audit during planning. That's when you're setting your risk assessment and deciding how you're going to allocate resources on a particular audit. And this is what I used in my corporate audit experience, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we march on. But let's see what the poll results say, Jim. And yeah, so wonderful. So we've got the right people on the call, I guess, with our strong domain expertise in finance and audit. We've got another polling question that we'll be asking later on which areas of the body of knowledge folks feel they may need to improve or to develop. But seeing that there's strong expertise in finance and audit domain expertise, that's a real strength. And what we would encourage folks to do is to ask the right business question, right? What are the outliers? What are the unusual transactions that deserve additional areas of focus? And it's that audit and finance domain expertise that's going to help folks ask the right question. Answering those questions takes some of the other skills that are on this list, but certainly asking them builds on the finance and audit expertise. Let's talk a little bit more about visual. So again, of the 7 areas that are in the body of knowledge, what we're doing is going to focus first a little bit on sharing what it means to have good visual reporting skills. And I'm going to go back to some older visual reporting examples, much older even than generalized audit software. So let's go to our next slide. I've got a somewhat real audit recommendation, if you will, from Florence Nightingale and statistician William Farr. They were studying soldier mortality rate during the Crimean War more than 150 years ago. And through the statistical analysis that they did, they were attempting to persuade the Queen that they needed to invest more in hygiene to keep the hospitals safe and to help the soldiers. This very early data visualization shows not just the words from the prior slide, but also the numbers, the human toll, the human statistics of who were dying in the Crimean War. The pink charts that are, the pink pie wedges that are on this catacomb chart from 100 plus years ago, 150 plus years ago, the pink pie wedges are deaths from combat, and the blue pie wedges were deaths from preventable diseases, things like hygiene. And Florence Nightingale's point was the most important thing that the country could do to be successful during the war was not military strategy, but actually improving the health conditions in the field hospitals. And the relative size of the bluish-gray triangles to the relatively small pink ones are probably one of the earliest, what I would characterize as a Hall of Fame data analytic where visual reporting techniques are used. I've got a second quick one here that also doesn't involve software, but rather a camera phone. Certainly all auditors have that tool in our tool set, And I had an auditor about 15 years ago that was doing a data center review for one of my client's Asian businesses, and he came back with that kind of age-old audit report. We needed to improve computer security, and that was hard to get additional budget. And he said, well, look at these pictures. It's not that it's bad, but it's terrible. And from the picture on his camera phone, he showed us, I love the air conditioner was instead a fan. It was connected to building power. It didn't have separate uninterruptible power supply, and all of the server equipment is in that closet, and the wall protecting the hardware doesn't even run all the way to the ceiling. There were sprinklers in the room, just a whole plethora of physical security challenges. And when we included the photograph in the audit report, it helped generate a lot of enthusiasm for improved data center controls, more so than the words on the previous slide. So again, kind of keeping with the notion that visual techniques are a way to get support for your audit recommendation. Now I'm going to share one of our firm's earlier Tableau visualizations, but let me let folks read and kind of digest the words here. What we were doing was we were doing an hourly payroll audit. We were focused on this notion of what is commonly called wage theft. That is where somebody would be punching out but perhaps continuing to work. And we looked at what time every individual came into work. They came in at 8:02. They went out at 11:57 for lunch. They came back at 12:45 for lunch, from lunch, and then went home at 5:02 during the afternoon. And the question is, how many minutes were they truly on the clock? And because we were rounding their time, how many minutes were they paid for? You can imagine that depending on what time you punched in or punched out, the rounding might be a couple of minutes one way or another in favor of the worker over a particular day. But over the course of time, you'd expect the positives and negatives to balance out with that green line kind of in the middle. But instead, this was how the line workers were actually impacted. And what I think folks see very quickly is that there's a lot more red ink than there is black ink. And what that meant was that workers were much more likely to be disadvantaged, and disadvantaged by a large number of minutes, in the largest case more than 20 hours over the course of a year. So this picture was just absolutely essential in mobilizing focus on punch in and punch out and time rounding. And again, very similar audit report recommendation, but instead of using words only, we've used pictures and been more successful in affecting change. So how can I do that with the tools that I have in my arsenal? As we led with the Gartner technology report at the onset, most everyone has at least one, sometimes more, tools in the technology landscape. We recommend having some combination of those tools, certainly some of the audit analytics space, as we see here, together with some other tools in the stack. So I think we have a polling question.
Okay, this question, which of these body of knowledge areas do you feel your team may need to develop its skills the most? Please review those. And it looks like we have another question that came in. This one I think is for Joe. This is from Christopher saying, I came from a previous industry that has heavy analytics where planning, data validation, and data exploration was valued greatly. How do you allocate, strategize the life of an analytic in an aggressive, fast-paced audit team?
I'm not sure if Christopher's looking for a number of hours, but certainly all of those areas that he's mentioning, right? Planning and data validation and data exploration. Let's break those apart first of all, and that is separating planning from data validation. In the areas of body of knowledge, planning, asking the right business question really falls into the finance and domain expertise, finance and audit domain expertise, and you've got to allocate certainly 10 to even 20 or 30% of your audit time for proper planning, and planning would include data exploration. Now, data validation, I think I want to separate that from planning and from data exploration. I want to do the data validation prior to doing the exploration. I don't want to be exploring if I haven't balanced two control totals. And just because an organization is aggressive or fast-paced doesn't mean that these fundamental steps aren't incredibly valuable. And certainly, if you don't do them, you can imagine that you would get less than desired results. Brad, anything you want to add to the question before we see the polling results?
No, I'm going to actually that's a great question over Christopher. I'm going to speak to that in a few minutes. Absolutely, yes.
Well, good. Good, I guess, because Brad and I have got some slides here, and we thought we would focus next on data acquisition. Our impression was that the couple of areas from the body of knowledge where teams may need to focus the most were visual reporting, which we've already spent some time on, but then also the data acquisition and manipulation. So, Brad, I think you're going to show us some really good things that we can do with Arbutus Analyzer from a data acquisition standpoint, and obviously we'll be talking more about visual reporting as we get into some of our Tableau examples. But always risky to have the poll question drive the next batch of slides, but things are in the right order here. This is good.
Yes.
Okay. Just a
yes,
reminder. Excuse me, just a reminder to everybody, we have a large audience today and we're getting a lot of questions coming in. We may not be able to get to all of the questions, but we are recording them, and either Brad or Joe can respond via email after the session is over if we don't get to your question. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. So when it comes to the utilization of analytics, certainly there can be a number of barriers, of course. I was trying to, and some of these poll responses now are very helpful. Certainly, one of the barriers we regularly hear about is certainly the ability to even access data or even understand what data they want to retrieve. Certainly, we're not going to spend too much time today on the, accessing the data, but very much, as a technology provider, we certainly are continually looking for ways to help our user community to get access to the data. But where I was going to start today are sort of next steps, back to that sort of exploratory element of that, understanding your data, preparing your data if need be, and then analyzing it. And all three of these areas are sort of where we focus in as a solution provider, and how we specifically support sort of the needs of auditors. So I'm going to, oops, went the wrong direction there, 1 second. Okay, here we go. So on the screen right now, I have obviously some address information. So I'm going to be using a couple of sort of common examples, addresses and names, just sort of to underline and give examples that everybody can relate to. You might find these specific examples, obviously, that show to be very helpful. We also, again, do want to keep in mind sort of things we already talked about today. The overall concept is exploring and understanding your data no matter what the data is. These may be analytic activities you already are undertaking, but in our experience, and as we've seen some of the poll questions here, exploring the data is something that is either not often done, or at least not done very well. Obviously, maybe that's just a lack of experience or comfort level, but certainly the idea of overcoming barriers to analytics, and then really putting forward the idea of immersing yourself in your data, understanding it. We have found that it really can improve your analytics, increase your confidence in what you're doing, and certainly open up new opportunities, hopefully, for audit testing. And I know a lot of you think, well, it's great in theory, but I don't have time for that, and so on. And certainly we recognize that, and that's what we hear a lot of from our user community. And that's where we really try to put a lot of thought and effort into how do we provide, a clear, straightforward, and time-efficient pathway to help users understand their data and where it's needed and take action to either cleanse it or prepare it or improve your analytics and results. So anyway, this example, on the first example here on the screen, is just around addresses, 4 different addresses. But the first example there, actually the address in this case is represented over 2 fields, which is very common in a lot of systems. And it's a matter of, well, humanly speaking, we can look at these and go, yeah, these are the same, but we know computers don't work that way. How do we understand what we're dealing with here if we actually want to match up addresses and understand them? So what are the things, even from an exploratory perspective, that we can do to understand what the situation is and how we can manipulate that? And in the same vein as well, think even about things like first names. So on the screen here, I just chose a female name and a male name, Elizabeth and Rick. The first 2 columns are allocated to Elizabeth. You can see there's 20 variations of how you might want to, a name might be represented by Elizabeth. And of course, Rick, there's a good 10 there. So that's not unusual around all the different iterations of how even something like first names can be looked at. So what I was going to do, I'm going to be toggling between some slides here. I'm going to jump into Analyzer right now and also a little bit into Notepad++. So as relates to addresses, on the screen right now, I have just a simple vendor master file. So this is, again, you've acquired this file, it's been set up, and now you want to understand, well, I want to do some analytics here, but I don't really know. Again, addresses are obviously example number 1 of what do I have here. Obviously, there's many other types of data that are more unique to your situation, but how do I go about improving this? And again, it's always about how do we give a simple, straightforward path to users that help understand their data. So one of the things that we have done is we provide a little app with our application that lets people do a simple word count. So I'm just going to go ahead and run that app right now, and on my address data. I just want to understand what's all in there. So I'm just going to go ahead, run this, and now it's prompting, okay, what data file? I'm going to choose my vendor master file, and then I'm going to choose what field. Now this app, again, I'm going to point it at my address field. You can point this at any field. It could be a comments field, could be notes, description. Anytime there's free-form information that you want to sort of understand what's all in there. So this is, again, a simple app that, again, from an exploratory perspective, can give you some really interesting information. It could be considered analytics in and of itself, but also in our case, we do understand, what steps do we want to take, what's there, how unclean or unstructured are elements of this address field. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And so again, as you can see here on the screen, what this app does, it goes through and every unique element in a field that's separated by a space, it looks at them all and counts them all. So, and what's great about this, the default here is to show this in sort order by count. So this is where on an address field you can expect, no matter what region of the world you're in and what your data you're looking at, some of the commonly occurring values will be near the top. And obviously the more unusual ones or misspelled ones, whatever they might be, less common ones, also be farther down. So just even as a starting point now, as you even explore this address information, it's a matter of, okay, here's what I have. So one of the things that we have our users do if they're trying to understand, okay, where's the starting point? What do? I want to understand even how to go about working with the data, maybe preparing it and cleansing it and normalizing it. So you can go ahead, and I guess one of the things that I've done right now is go ahead and you can grab all the data that's occurring fairly frequently. Now this isn't a very large file, so you see the numbers aren't that high. On a more of a larger volume, say vendor file or anything with address in, it's going to even be higher. But here you can see there are 3,700 unique elements that have been identified. So what I did is effectively took this, pasted into a simple text file. Let me show you. So that's what I'm showing you here on the screen now. This is simple. I'm in Notepad++ right now, and I've taken that file and plunked in all the ones I think are pretty common. So what I want to do now is just kind of use this little file I created using that little app and use it as I go back to here and apply a filter and using that keyword kind of as an alphabetic marker to help me see other ones. So I'm just going to quickly right-click on this, and I'm going to sort ascending. So I want to now focus in on this word field, the specific word, and now I'm going to apply a little filter that we support called list find. So as it implies, you take a list, you put in the list, and there's the one I just created, choose what field you want to apply it to, and you're done. So now it's going through. Now I've set my software right now to let me to see all the information, whether it's filtered or not, but obviously make it distinct. So I'm just going to skip now to the first result. So as you can see here, I think I had south in that list. So now you can see here, first example here, somebody didn't put spacing in this result, and therefore we found a hit on that. And same thing, I think, with the second example. Now, as I go further, now I've avenue is in there because it occurred many times. And now it's because alphabetically close to other ones. You can see here, as I looked at all the variations of how avenue was represented in this, assuming they were spelled by the first letter or two, you can even see here that there's some iterations here of maybe how avenue was spelled or misspelled in the address field, and give you some sense of what steps you can take or what you need to take take further action on this information. So that's just, again, a simple exploratory example when you think about understanding your data after you acquire it and planning that. And again, this can be very much analytical, depending on the type of data field that you're applying this to. In this case, it is helping us give some sense of the steps you may want to take to normalize and standardize and clean up some of this address information. Now, it's going to head back to our slides here. So we've taken the step of understanding what we have and maybe gone through and understood it all. Now it's a matter, okay, what steps it's going to take to manipulate and clean up this data. And so I've put a couple of ways that we support within our application on cleaning up the data. So effectively, as you're seeing here, the first example here around normalizing your data. So normalizing should be a term you're all familiar with. And the value on the left here is sort of the raw address data. And after normalization, you can see the punctuation is gone, everything's uppercased. And what you will also see is things like south and street have been standardized and changed. The S on the first example there and ST. Now, the bottom of this slide here, you'll see something called sort normalize. And this is another, again, I'll walking you through this in more detail in a few minutes here, but with addresses and potentially other types of data, recognizing that there can be occur in different orders. So how do you go about doing that? So this is where trying to provide a simple, straightforward way to standardize data, in this case of taking what you have, and what this sort normalize does is it takes everything in a field separated by a space and puts it in the sending order. So this is where on the bottom here on the right, you'll see 1623 40th way south becomes way south 40th 10623, an odd looking address, but the key part here is that standardizing information. So as you take the next step and provide analytics, you've now have a very clean way of going about that. Now, if I go down to sort of show the next example here, when you now go to the place now where I want to match these up, how do I bring these together? So at the very top of this address here, the original one, you can see it's the same address, but of course it's rendered a little differently. And you can see that's in its raw form. And then after normalizing it, as I've explained, it did standardize east and street. They all were made the same, but they are in different orders. One starts with East 10th Street, the other one is 10th Street East. And by sort normalizing it, we now have made these two exactly the same. So just showing you kind of as an example of iterative steps that you can take to normalize the data. And same thing with first names. And again, I'll show you an example of this in a few minutes. Just like I showed you Elizabeth and Rick and all those iterations. Now, if you can have a way of taking all the iterations and looking for all the iterations in a first name file and choosing a one that you want to standardize on, that's what it could look like. So let me switch back here to Notepad for a second here. So in those normalization slides I showed you, this is the exact file that we had created. So if you recall, I created that little simple file earlier that is searched on in that, that app where we did a word count. And now I've taken that information and over all the information elements here in an address field and put them in here. And then you see the value on the left. I've highlighted again the ones around Avenue. And so these are all different ways Avenue might be represented, but based on my exploratory processes. And now I've changed those all to A to E. So that's all that does is two values typically, where you have a value that checks for, and then you want to change it to the value on the right. And just a quick show you here. Obviously, street extensions are key. These are very North American-centric ones. I get that. But what region of the world you're in, as you do that word count and go through that normalization and exploratory stage, you can now get to a point where you are going to be able to create these for yourselves. And you'll see places where things like suite and unit are on the left. If there's nothing to the right, we just remove them. And so there's, even if it's a matter of removing elements that in order to standardize them, that's there as well. And of course, directions and so on. Whatever you can think of that you can standardize in an address, that you can do. So let's go back in here into Analyzer. And let me bring some of those fields into view here. So I'm going to quickly add a few columns here to our screen based on the analytics I was just showing you. So I've added on the normalized and sort normalize ones that I was just talking about. And I'm also going to add in ones that where I normalized the first name. So I'll bring those in as well. So here we have, again, a simple process here where you can see the data is being normalized, and another field here where it's been sort normalized, and we now have made our data much more consistent. So now as we move to the next step of performing analytics, we now will have a much more consistent and a useful data set in order, whether it's matching or testing for duplicates or any other analytics you want to do, you've now gone through and done that. So the prep side, the exploring side, this certainly is one element of this that we offer skills and opportunities to give an easy path for all levels of users, hopefully, to take some of these steps without having to be reliant on other people to do this for them. Take care of that. Okay, so let's move forward then onto the analytics side. So quick lesson on fuzzy. So we've understood our data, we've gone ahead and normalized it, cleaned it up. Now let's go ahead and do some analytics, and let's talk about fuzzy analytics. So quick lesson, one of our algorithms allows you to compare two strings, and based on that comparison, it assigns a number. So just so you all can understand what's going to be happening in a minute here when I do some of these things, if you were to compare the name Rob to Robert, the algorithm would say, oh, it's a 3. Either add the last 3 letters, ERT, or subtract them to make them the same. And then Gary and Mary, that's just a one change difference, the first letter, where you have values that are transposed, like Gary and Gray, that's considered a 1. And then in some more complex strings like addresses, same rules apply. In this case, the only difference between the two addresses is one's got fully spelled street, one's got it abbreviated, that's a 4. So now you can think about if we were able to normalize elements first, like addresses, prior to doing fuzzy, we can really hone in on the more subtle differences, and that's what we'll sort of focus in a minute here. So let's switch back over here to Analyzer and just walk through a little bit of the interaction and the querying that you can do and doing some initial analytics. And then, of course, you compile these analytics, and then it's about, as Joe will talk about, visually representing some of these results in a more compelling way, in a more interactive way. So So here I have this vendor master file, and I want to do 3 different tests. So first test I want to do is, okay, well, I want to be able to compare my vendor addresses to my employee addresses. Now, the way you can conduct comparisons between files like that within our software is within the join. So here is the join dialog. So I'm not going to walk all the way through this, but I just want to give people a sense of how this could look. So when you set up a join, you obviously choose your 2 files. In this case, because I'm going to be applying some fuzzy elements, you're going to choose like a matched many-to-many. And you can see here we give you a little Venn diagram there in the top right, kind of showing you what you're doing. So with this sort of test, we maybe want to choose a field that is a match, like say city or zip code. And then we choose what fields we want to include. And then you'll see in the bottom right here, we can add an expression based on one of those fuzzy algorithms. Okay, well, I want to know, bring these files together if they're a exact match or if they're sort of a close match based on that algorithm I showed you. So prior to our session today, I'd gone through and done this. And then once you get a result, we give you the little button that you click on and said, okay, create an app that will let me do this for you. So this, for the purpose of time, I have my little app that I created based on my result that I had generated earlier. I'm going to go ahead and run this. So it's going through, and it's joining these 2 files, employees, and creating a result. And now that is here on my screen. So this result is just addresses. If I was to do more of this, I'd want to include additional fields as well. But for our purposes today, I just want to have everybody sort of see an end result here. So I'm going to drag my 2 sort normalized fields beside each other here. And here they go. So they're on the screen. I have my original vendor addresses, employee addresses, the match that was based on sort normalized, and I also included some of the normalized elements as well. So just to give you a sense, again, of what you're looking at here. This is part of whether you consider it exploratory or further analytics. If you're curious, then, well, okay, what matches would I have got if I didn't normalize at all? So I'm just going to drag this up here on my screen and say, okay, well, show me the ones where the raw addresses would have matched. Let me hide filtered records. So here we go. We have one result if we had done a match on the raw address. Now, if I had done a match on to the normalized address without sort normalizing it, look at that. We would have a lot more exact matches going beyond that. So the normalization really allows it to get a much more success. Now, if I just did a quick see where are these the same, if I'm matching the sort normalized, and it looks like we've got a few more. Now, this doesn't represent all of our results because these are actually exact matches. And if you recall, we also had added a fuzzy element to this saying, well, show me the ones where they are exact and also where they were close. And so if I wanted to see which ones would I have not gotten irregardless unless I did fuzzy, I'm just going to put not equal to there. And so now we are looking at addresses that we would never have matched unless we normalized them first and we applied some of that fuzzy algorithms here. So here's the 2 columns here that we want to focus on. Rook with an E and rook without an E and so on. And examples here, same result. The third one there, you see the last 3rd and 4th letter, they're transposed, U, A, U, and so on. Robins with 2 Bs, one with 1 B, and so on. So these are just showing you some of the analytics. So now, what I can now do is just go ahead, okay, these are the results I want from this initial test. I'm going to now go ahead and export these. Send these to Tableau, give this a name, address to Tableau, click on OK, and now I've sent in these results to my TDE file in the file. So here we go. There's our TDE that we can now have Joe take in a few minutes here and include that as part of his analytics. If I can go back to my slides here, just to walk you through the last couple of examples here, just to talk you through them. So again, here is another, what we just did a minute ago, of taking some analytics, comparing two addresses and getting a result as a test one. The second test that you can do is to do a match on numeric with those phone numbers. So I'm not going to show you this in the software, but the same idea. You can look for character close, date proximity, and numeric proximity, and send those results to Tableau. And now you can also do the same test of matching names. So like I showed you name normalization earlier, you can now do matches on names, employee names, and vendor contact names, and increase your success rate by doing those, and now sending those all to Tableau. So at this point, the step is to take the results that you've created based on cleansing data, analyzing the data, and this is actually a snapshot from Tableau, where we want to know, well, where are there vendors where it's both the address, there's a name match, and a close phone number. I want to see all three, but where are 2 out of 3, maybe 1 out of 3, and how do you visually represent some of those findings that allow you to sort of tell a story and allow further inquiry and follow-up. So here's just a simple snapshot of something that was taken out of Tableau Analytic. And so now I'll hand it off to Joe to take us further with Tableau.
Thank you, Brad. Appreciate it a great deal. I hope folks have been impressed as we have with the data preparation that Brad's showing us in Arbutus. The point that I wanted to make here is we've got really 2 ways to render those. We've got 2 ways to render those findings, those address matches. One, the more traditional way that we might do that would be with Excel. And now I've got my row number and the name match and the address, and maybe I'd use a filter to show the name matches or the address matches or perhaps the phone numbers. The new and improved way would be to take that same data file, and again, one of the things we really like about Arbutus is Arbutus will write out a Tableau data extract file that we can bring straight in to Tableau. So I've got here on the screen those matches, and what you see, if I'm trying to sort, let me see only the name matches. Let me do a quick keep only the name matches, and these are the records where the names are either a exact match or perhaps one that's very close, DD with a hyphen or not a hyphen, or I can remove that filter and now I see address and name. The idea is that with Tableau, with that visual scan, as I move my cursor over each of the individual matches, it's much easier for me to say, oh, I like the algorithm is effective, yes, I see the names are similar, yes, I see the addresses are similar or perhaps not. And so I think it's, like I said, a very nice example of the data prep work that is a strength with Arbutus Analyzer to really come to life with a bit more in a visual way. The last example that we wanted to share is something that we've been working on in the lease accounting, International Accounting Standard, ASC 842, focused on leases. And this new accounting pronouncement has really been a headache for a number of teams in finance. It requires that we go back and look at all of our operating leases, our traditional rental, short-term, not a capital lease, but an operating lease, and reevaluate whether some of those operating leases need to be disclosed on the balance sheet. We were doing a project focused on accounts payable and duplicate pay, all while our client had a separate parallel initiative focused on leases. They were doing what I'd characterize as a kind of a shake the bushes exercise, where they were going out and contacting each of their corporation business sites and saying, are you a lease? Do you have any transactions that we may need to disclose with the new accounting standard? And what we did with analytics, with both Arbutus Analyzer supplemented by Tableau, instead of going out to 40 or 50 business units and asking them, do you have any leases? What we did was some data prep work to identify through analytics, to identify if some of those recurring payments of same or similar amount might have been representative of a lease. So as I said, this project was already underway. We had done the data quality, the integrity, the balancing of accounts payable disbursements. We were already working with that data source for duplicate payments, and the additional time to do a little bit of data prep work with Arbutus and then visualizing the results in Tableau were quite quick, and internal audit wound up with a very happy chief accounting officer. So let's take a look at what made them so happy. We'll talk a little bit about how we used Analyzer. First, we sorted the payments by vendor. Every one of the payments was subtotaled by vendor and by amount, and if the amounts were close to each other, then we created a small index to increment that the first payment was, the second payment was related to the first payment, the third payment was related to the second payment, but then when the fourth payment in dollar value sequence was proved to be significantly different in amount than the first three, then we reset that index back to 1 and kept going again, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, until we identified payments that were similar or exact in value. So here's an example of those payments, and we've enlarged them. What we're asking here is the $3,500 payment plus or minus some particular percentage? In this case, I think we use 10%. Is this $3,580 payment plus or minus 10% to the $3,551? If yes, we increment it up to 2, 3, 4, etc. And here we had 25 payments that were all of similar amount to this particular lumber company, but as the payments jumped from a running average of around $3,500 or $3,600 all the way up to over $4,000, that was when we knew that this counter needed to be reset, and there was a new index with 10 similar payments. So the Tableau data extract was created with Arbutus, and then a really valuable visualization that I'm showing here. And what I think folks can see is that each of these payments of a same or a similar amount are being shown over time near the other payments of the same amount. And the more regular payments have a very specific amount of white space between each of them. And if the payments are fairly irregular, as they are here in these payments to ABCD International, right? There's a $5,000 payment that happens a few times, and then they take a couple of months off, and then they take a couple of more months off, and then they have 2 of them, and then 1 of them, and then 5 of them. That's not a lease payment. But then when we look at this scientific rentals, and sure enough, every 30 days, a regular payment of this exact amount. the exact leases we didn't need to use Arbutus Analyzer for, but for payments where the amounts were similar, and the case of Sunnyside rentals, what was happening was they were paying a fixed amount for a daily rental, but because some months have 30 days and some months have 31 days, and February had 28 or 29 depending on what year, all of a sudden we needed to look at payments that were of similar but not exact value. And again, the white space on this chart in Tableau, together with the Arbutus Analyzer indexes that we created, were very helpful in showing payments that were likely leases under the new accounting standard. So I know we want to allow some time for Q&A with the group. In terms of key takeaways, how do you get to be one of the folks on the Gartner survey that are in the top quartile of organizations that are using data analytics regularly on your audit projects? The first suggestion, as we mentioned previously, is to have a repeatable methodology, to focus on the diverse skills that are needed. It requires data analytics skills, data acquisition skills, finance and domain expertise, and also, as we've shown examples here, also visual reporting skills are something that you ought to try and add to your portfolio. The way that we tend to work with our clients is to have us help them build their capabilities, but having us work with them as a coach or a mentor allows them to get more done than they would be able to had they gone off on their own. So certainly find a mentor, whether it's inside your organization through an academic organization or through a consulting firm that you may already be working with. Certainly those mentors are a wonderful way to get things done. Very, very important, as Brad and I have both shown you. I think spending more time on exploratory analytics can help you be successful. Visual reporting, and the last point I wanted to make is really this idea of Analyzer plus Tableau being 1 + 1 being 3, not 2, that the two tools together, both in the address matching example and in the leases example, the combination of more traditional tabular analytics together with visual reporting really was a positive influence for our clients. So the way that we wanted to close, ask folks, what are your strengths? Are there areas where you believe you want to build your skills or your team's skills? Definitely the leading organizations that we work with find that all internal audit folks, not just the data specialists, but everyone who has responsibility for a particular audit project should participate in brainstorming. This is not a data-driven exercise or an IT exercise, but really a business and internal control questions. Again, look for a mentor, whether that's a guest auditor from another department or your college intern or a consulting firm. There's opportunities for great value to be added when you work with a mentor. Can't overlook the importance of data quality, and I think another point that I want to leave folks with is this idea of simple and achievable tests. I think the hack consultant phrase is "don't boil the ocean," and we would agree with that. Let's not build an audit plan to build 20 different analytics. Let's build a plan and do 3 or 4, and then once we have those 3 or 4 analytics built, if there's time to build more, great, but let's not take on too much and focus instead on the simple and achievable tests. I think we've got one final polling question, and then we'll open up to the other Q&A from the group.
Okay, while everybody is answering the polling question, there's a question here for Brad. You covered normalizing data, text data, during your projects. Do you normalize numerical data? For example, if you have data that is skewed, do you normalize the data, such using the log of the data, to review the data and use parametric statistics?
Oh, that one's at me, is it? Okay. So, well, I have not. Yes, I think I'll be calling a lifeline here in a second, Joe. But certainly the idea of cleaning up and normalizing your data, again, there's any type of data, wherever that may be, that would require some sort of cleansing, standardizing. Yeah, whether it's those particular functions I showed or other functions that we offer capabilities to manipulate massage data are certainly there. The steps to take for your specific question, I wouldn't know that one, but Joe, you're welcome to weigh in on that one.
We use log data, logarithmic presentation of data to sometimes on scatter plots where the traditional XY, what is the relationship between a group of numbers and another group of numbers, that you wind up with an excessive amount of white space between the dots and it's hard to see the shape. So it's just a couple of clicks to begin to look for other regression lines or other relationships on a scatter plot document. And again, modern analytics tools, particularly visual analytics tools, Tableau, Power BI, Click, and then some of the R and Python capabilities certainly help us with taking that on.
Okay, well, let me go ahead and close the poll. We do have some other questions that have been raised here, but let me close the poll and share the results. Accessing the data seems to be the biggest issue. This has probably been a big issue for the last 20 years.
Yes.
Or more.
Absolutely. Yeah, and as I mentioned earlier, we didn't talk too much about that today, but very much that we could do a whole webinar on that topic alone, and there's very much we're always looking for ongoing ways to better support that. But yeah, I'm not surprised to see that result.
Okay, I'll go ahead and hide the results. And we have another question here for Brad. This came from Jose. What due diligence do you do to get comfort over the results from data analytics before using them in your audits?
Well, yeah, so there's very much the exploratory part of your data, and that's where you really, I mentioned earlier, hopefully through the exploratory phase and understanding that, you are gaining confidence in your data, so that when you go ahead and do your analytics and your final conclusions, you've immersed yourself in the data and understood it really well, so that you can have a higher confidence. And this is some of our points earlier, where sometimes the exploratory element is not focused on. I know there was a question earlier in our session from Christopher, who that was very much in his prior role in the area, was very much something that they did and focused on. But I know for a lot of the audit groups I work with, that doesn't happen as often at times, and that's where the more you can do that up front, it does allow you to have more confidence that what you're presenting is true and accurate. Any thoughts on that, Joe?
Yeah, I came back to the methodology slide here, and that second box of acquiring and mapping data, you'll notice that we've got balance on there twice, right? It's not just a technical balance where I count the number of rows that are in the data set and do some sort of a control total on them, but I also have to tie the data back to a financial record, right? If I ask somebody in IT for the year-end file, it's very likely that the file will be very close to midnight on New Year's Eve for a 12/31 year-end client. But if I ask the person in accounting and finance for the year-end file, they're going to say, well, do you want the 12/31 file, or do you want the file from January 15th after we've had all of our topside adjustments? And the notion here that balancing and that data quality component is an absolutely critical step before getting too far with the exploratory or even the confirmatory analytics. This is the picture that went in my head when we read Jose's question. Others?
Oh, I'm sorry. There's a question here from Catherine for Brad. Are there external lists that we can plug into to help normalize names? Our data set includes many different countries, so we can't do it from personal knowledge.
Yeah, so we provide some lists to our customers, but they are not representative of global addresses. They are more North American centric. And same thing as the ones we have around even first names are certainly more in the English-speaking world, and names around that. But so this is where, so beyond that, there's no external lists that we have. But again, even when we created some of these lists around first names, there were, outside of us, there were some external sites I went to that did give an excellent starting point for some of the name normalizations that are out there. And based on, I don't know, by country you would do that. But certainly on the address side, the starting point would be, I'd say, to do that, some of that word analytics I mentioned earlier. And then that's, if your customer and your organization is global, and you're able to analyze all of those elements, then hopefully that would be a good starting point. But external lists, there are some out there, but nothing that would be as tidy as you probably would like it to be. But that's where, based on your own data, there's an excellent starting point for you to create some of those yourself. And again, in our case, we make those very simple text files, or very simple, and for you to set up and use. But yeah, there's a bit of work to get there on that.
Okay. Should people be expected to be trained and functional in multiple tools?
Well, I would say, Joe can weigh in on this one as well, but I would say certainly individual skills and aptitudes obviously vary. So I do think, depending on the size of your group, you maybe want to look at the training and skills collectively as a team where possible. The more, obviously, that can be represented in one person or multiple persons with the same skills, that certainly is ideal. But certainly there's so many elements that you need to factor into with how frequently are these skills needed. So, for example, if you are getting PDFs a lot, but it's a kind of awkward process to work with that type of data, do you have only one person that sort of is tasked with that, or do you get that? So frequency of use, difficulty of these things. But I would say not everyone in your team wouldn't necessarily have the aptitude. Some of the points that Joe was making earlier about, body of knowledge and evidence, I would say no, but collectively as a team, yes.
Yeah, the thing I would add to that, Brad, is the idea that it's everybody's job on the team to be able to do the fundamentals. The fundamentals are to recognize that the control totals balance to the IT totals, but that there perhaps have not been any topside entries after New Year's Eve at midnight. So it's everybody's job to have the fundamental understanding, to go through the methodology and to perform the tasks. when somebody does find a data anomaly, that is that they were expecting a match between John and Juan, is an example, and the normalization routines did not handle the language translation very well. I don't know that it's everybody's job on the team to know how to go into the code and change the code, but it's everybody's job to recognize that there was an expectation that those names ought to match, and if they didn't, to recognize that perhaps the code needs to be changed.
Okay, here's a question from Raphael. How long does it take a CPA with no IT skills to arrive at the techniques shown by you today?
Well, I would say
that's for either one of you, either Joe or Brad.
Yeah, that's an excellent question, Jose, because so much depends on the aptitudes of the person. Certainly, as Joe and I have both been at this for many years, certainly just because someone is an excellent auditor, it doesn't necessarily make them a strong data analyst. And certainly our intent with, say, from a technology standpoint is to sort of give an easy path for people to perform these analytics themselves and understand what they're doing. And like even Joe said already, you want to understand kind of what questions you want to ask. Now maybe technically how you get to your result with the technology itself, obviously those are helpful as well. You want to be able to understand the technology, but as an analyst you want to get comfortable with that. So learning, I would say training as a data analyst I think is the starting point. And then of course the technology, looking at different ways of doing that. As I mentioned in my examples earlier, we try to get closer. I give a simple example around our Word app. Obviously, we have more audit-focused apps as well, whether it's around AP or fraud compliance. There's apps that allow you to kind of lead the way as long as you understand what you're trying to get to with that without understanding the technology itself. But it's always, the more you can understand and able to understand individually or collectively as a team, and understand and recognize that the less, you don't want to trust your instruments or trust your own that it's all happening. You want to know behind the scenes, at least have people in your team that can do that.
Okay, is there a place to see other examples or ideas of how to use visualization tools in audit?
Well, Joel, you're the visualization guy. I'll let you handle that.
You know, we've got some resources. We've done a series of webinars for Tableau on visualization, and I'm happy to put out an additional handout for today. There are 3 authors that I really like for data visualization. One of them is Stephen Few. Stephen Few writes a book called Show Me the Numbers. I like Stephen Few's work a lot. I like Edward Tufte, and also a woman named Donna Wong, W-O-N-G, who writes a book on data visualization with a focus on infographics based on her work with the Wall Street Journal. If I were looking to beef up my visualization techniques more broadly, I'd point to Stephen Few or Tufte or Donna Wong. If it were visualization specific for internal audit, we can certainly provide a couple of webinar links.
Perfect. Well, I think we're close to the closing time for today. I want to thank everybody for joining us and for your excellent questions. We hope the session was helpful for you. Thanks to Joe and Brad for sharing their knowledge and experience on this topic. Just a reminder, if you're viewing the session live, you'll also receive an evaluation form at the conclusion of the webinar. Please take a few moments to complete it when it arrives. It'll help us improve the webinars. If you would like to view other webinars on demand, we've partnered with C-Risk Academy, where you can view webinars at any time, any place, and earn CPE. Finally, both Joe and Brad are available for additional support after the webinar. Their contact information is on the final slide, which you can see now. Please feel free to contact them by phone or email if they can be of additional assistance. So any closing thoughts from you, Joe, and you, Brad?
No, thanks for your summary there, Jim. Said we thank everyone for joining us today, and we appreciate there's lots of content here, but certainly we always are very eager and open to a dialogue with each of you as you have questions around some of these issues and around further discussion around the questions and challenges of analytics, data acquisition, visualization, and so on. So hopefully we're welcome. Look forward to supporting you as you go forward with your analytics.
Very good. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much. Have a great day and a great week, and we look forward to welcoming you back to future webinars, and look for future webinars from Arbutus as well. So thank you and have a great day. Bye.